When people keep telling you, we're not ready and we don't, you ask them, what do you need to be ready? So, you give me your list. You give me your list. Do you think we should have 3 international airports? Do you think we should have an extra harbor that can, because when it comes to that conversation, nobody could tell you exactly what they think should be the things that should be on the list that you need to check off. When you think of
There's no checklist.
There's no checklist. There's no checklist. I remember seeing Kitts and Nevis going. I was a teenager growing up when the discussion was on the radio a lot. And as a teenager, I was fascinated by that conversation. I remember I would have my transistor radio plugged into the bed at night when they would have the you could find the stations. And then also Mr. Speaker would be on late on PJ2 at night. And you'd hear the discussions in St. Martin and the people in St. Kitts. And you were saying that they're having almost the same kind of conversations. But in St. Kitts, the conversation had a lot to do with being ready. And that whole conversation about the same things that you hear in St. Martin, the same concerns that people in St. Kitts. They went
without a lot of things either not being.
They didn't have half of what we have. No.
Have you been to St. Kitts recently?
Exactly.
You see the progress?
You see the port St. Kitts has when you see our port. And so when you hear people say that, I say, well, you know what? Let's just use St. Kitts because St. Kitts is more recent. St. Kitts is also a little bigger than St. Martin, not exactly less populated, but a little bigger. And if you were to make comparisons, it was also about where the leadership of St. Kitts thought St. Kitts should be heading. So they had a vision of where their country should be. And don't forget, you mentioned Ralph Gonsalves.
Right.
When you look at the independence movement in the Caribbean especially, you see that a lot of these people that are, up front in the independence conversation are coming out of a University of the West Indies tradition. They are being educated at the University of the West Indies, either before or even during the preparations phases, or even when they're going. So when you look down the line of the leadership throughout the Caribbean, you'll see the importance of having a university, for example, that is building human capacity, that is training people in a tradition of self-sufficiency and self-reliance, and how important it is to foster the discussion on national identity. I remember a few years when I was in St. Vincent, on one of the visits that I was there was a discussion about changing the flag, about changing the emblem on the flag. And I remember on the radio almost every day, there was this discussion about the breadfruit leaf. Because, St. Vincent, the breadfruit is really important to St. Vincent. And different people had different opinions about whether the breadfruit leaf should be in. But I was thinking to myself, what a beautiful conversation to have as a people, about building our national symbols and the things that Vincentians feel are important to them to be, part of that discussion. Those are the kinds of discussions I wish we are having more of in St. Martin. And I think we are in that time now where we need to be having more of those conversations.
And having said that, when I travel the Caribbean, I like to speak with people. And St. Kitts, Nevis, Antigua, those places, you find people, they're very oriented toward their country and their culture. They have no regrets of independence.
Yeah.
Contrary to Jamaica, that surprised me.
Not all Jamaicans feel that way, though.
I know, I was surprised that day because I had a gentleman from Jamaica here. He's a Rasta, he's a lawyer actually. And I was surprised. In fact, I posted on Facebook 2 years ago, and I was surprised the other day when I went to check how many people looked at that video. And he was saying on this program here that, there was a survey, that Jamaicans kind of regretted it, and I was really shocked. But
I would guarantee you that was not the majority opinion.
I was surprised.
I would guarantee
I was surprised. The 3 countries in the Caribbean that I've spoken to people about independence, and I was a little surprised, is Puerto Rico. That's before Irma. Guadeloupe and Martinique. And this is what I find so similar to St. Martin. Why you?
Oh, it's interesting that you pick those countries because Professor Mervyn Alain, who is my dissertation director at the University of Puerto Rico, he has a book called Race and Ethnic Identity Construction in the Caribbean. and he picked Martinique, he picked Puerto Rico, and he represented the Spanish, and he picked, there was another island that he picked, that he compared those same discussions about, and independence was one of those conversations. Now, I don't know what your findings were, what your findings were telling you, but what he was saying in the book is that because of their colonial status, that's number one, their discussion of identity as a people is a little different than you find in the so-called, in the British or the independent territories. And he talks about how the power dynamics are in these places where you still, even though the majority of the people are, let's say, of African descent, for example, the power base is still in the hands of the Europeans or the Anglos or whatever. But that has a lot to do with identity and identity politics and how the education system trains those people to behave.
But there's also another similar fear, like that we can't go because we're dependent on this other colonial power. And this is what surprised me.
But the education system trains you to believe that way. When you think, for example, a discussion that we have in St. Martin about something that should be as simple as language of instruction, that who in their right mind would ever say that your own language should not be your language of instruction in your school? Where else on the planet where people have a choice that they would choose not to choose their own language as the language of instruction in their education system? You will get at St. Martin where there's still this sense of, I would say, an inferiority complex, because you're trained that education that you're doing in St. Martin, not that your child is going to be this great person in the universe, that your child is going to be trained to go to school in Holland. As if the only place that your child can ever go to school is in Holland or France. So I'm using the both sides of the island. And then the whole conversation comes around, but you got to be able to speak French and you got to be able to speak Dutch. As if that has anything to do with the level of intelligence, the level of ability to produce anything significant for your country, etc. So we tie it to that conversation because we have no other argument. Now, if you get St. Martin people to understand, for example, that language of instruction is very much tied to power dynamics in the discourse. So who controls the power? Because language is power and power is language. If you get people to understand, when you have the upper hand in the discourse, you also have a say in the thing, you will see but people are not understanding that if you insist that just because some laws are written in Dutch, for example, therefore your judges and your lawyers cannot train in English, that makes absolutely no sense, but people repeat it because there's no other argument.